So what follows is the research paper lesson. I'm just going to dive right in because, if I give you a quick summary of what's happening or coming up, I might leave out something important. Of course, be sure and refer to the documentation and citation lesson because it does inform things. And if you view the argumentative lesson and you consider pathos, ethos, and logos, the understanding those and being able to identify and classify those in your sources for the research paper might help you kind of view things. In fact, that's what I tell my 1302 students. So a few things to keep in mind for your research papers for this class and in general. You can make your paper argumentative, informative, or a mix of both. And what I mean by mix of both is that you can look at both sides or several sides. Remember, though, it is immature to kind of view things as one-sided or even two-sided. There are multiple sides to every perspective. Your research paper does not have to take a position, although be open to doing so. And if you change your mind as a result of your research, go for it. You really should be striving to gain some kind of new perspective, greater understanding, have an epiphany or aha moment, or even then changing your mind as a result of your research. You become more focused and move away from general comments to more specific details comprising an issue. You'll look up for examples that then illustrate these complicated concepts, which as a result of your own research become less complicated. You'll want to then have the right balance of technical information so that you don't wander too far into jargon, but you won't be necessarily defining every single terminology or new word to your reader. You'll be forming new, stronger opinions based on your research, and so you'll want to then consider primary and secondary sources. Primary sources are original first-hand accounts, research that was done and commented on by the people who did it, people who were there reporting on the front lines when news broke, stories written about events by people who were there as well. There's considerations again for this type of sources. You'll have an incomplete but still authentic picture of what's going on. Secondary sources are of course those that have come out after the fact. They'll have more complete picture. There'll be a recreation of events, but again they'll be reflective of people's bias and the hindsight after the fact. Think of your sources like a witness to a trial. Each represents a different point of view. Each has different considerations and limitations. Think of like several witnesses in this case. First, you have a perfect, wonderful witness who saw everything, remembers everything, heard everything. Then you have a witness who's a friend of the accused, and you have a witness who's a friend of the defense. Then you have a witness who has bad vision but was there. And then you have another witness who had a hard time remembering everything. Again, each of these would be necessary to construct a complete picture of the events, and more likely than not, the one you think is perfect, you're just falling to your own confirmation bias and can't comment too much on. We'll do some considerations for the research process. First of all, you'll want to think about your topic. Now, you can go with what you're already aware of, what you're interested in, or certainly, what you already like, but you should hesitate when using what you already know in the paper itself. If you already know something, you didn't do research to back it up, and so there's minimal utility in putting it in a research paper. Not so with other types of papers, but something to consider as well. You'll think you're speaking expertly, and maybe you are. If you are reflecting your expertise or experience, you can talk about that, but the purpose of a research paper is to go further than what you already know, so identify that. For topics you might be interested or do so as a hobby or what you like, think of the issues that someone who's not so closely involved with them might face when reading about it. There's always some kind of complicated topic or challenge or problem in a sport, hobby, whatever, and you can research that to get a better understanding of it. You'll want to also perhaps think of the subtopics, the components of a larger topic. You don't want to pick too big a topic to where you'll have a hard time really saying very much anything of depth. So you'll want to then think of, well, what are those smaller pieces of that I can really explore. Initially, you'll be finding sources, and you'll want to of course, skim them. Do more than just read the abstract, which is a summary of a source that many academic journals have. But you won't have to be reading them too deeply. You're trying to identify those sources which are worth following up later on. From there, you judge those sources, and after that, you then try and read them as closely as possible. Your next step would be then to extract the most useful information from those sources, uncomplicate it, so you're not simplifying, but you're trying to help the reader understand what they need to know to have a better understanding of the topic. You, of course, are striving to be more of an expert, and so that judgment should be based on something useful, and of course, in this case, your research. You're also then choosing the order in which you are presenting that to your reader. You want to then comment on this information and, of course, cite appropriately. So far as your topic is concerned, just a few more things to think about. Current events, while certainly interesting and useful way to start or to think about for most types of writing, might not be achievable for a research paper. You know, usually for a 1302 class or 1301 English class, you'll have more than enough research options or topics or sources. But as you get more advanced, you know, unless you're willing to go into a lab or, you know, do all the surveys, there might not be enough information for you with current issues that pop up. You also will want to avoid making your essay as well as using sources that are basic introductions to the issue. The first links in a Google search that introduce a person or a topic might not be that good to use as sources because you're trying to write something that's better than those. And if, again, like I've been saying, if you already know or are aware of a topic, you didn't research it, so you don't want to put that into the paper itself. Although, you also have the opportunity to then look at a topic from different disciplines, you know, different subjects, psychological, sociological, medical, historical, political, scientific. Everything has some version of these things, and so rather than looking at it a for or against model, look at it from different points of view this way. You could also then go to see how other countries, other parts of the world handle the issue for comparison or just for, you know, guidance. And then you could also think, well, if the way things are unsatisfactory for so many people, why do they remain unchanged? You know, you could start thinking who benefits from current problems, because if something's a problem for most people, well, it's working out for a lot of people who maybe can do something about it but choose not to. While by no means all-encompassing or the only thing you need to do, I've created a source checklist that can help you then maybe weed out some sources relatively quickly and still maintain and have some good sources left. Now, just because something meets all these criteria or abandons it doesn't mean it's useful or you should throw it away. Just have some considerations. Again, my class, everything is a suggestion. If you have a good reason for ignoring the suggestion, well, make sure you can compose yourself and that your grade does not suffer. If you can create a full citation for your source, it's a good sign of things. All that information in the citation is useful, and if it's missing, it raises flags for other things. Ask yourself, is your source scholarly or professional? If it's scholarly, it's been reviewed by other experts in the field, and if it's professional, there's some consequence for the writer of the source if they present bad information or put it out there. Do they have an organization behind them supporting them or insisting that they create certain kind of information? You know, that will help you identify the bias of your source. Is the information verifiable? You're not asked to trust information willy-nilly, but the better sources do a better job of revealing everything for you so that you can, you know, look into it yourself. Consider the author's history, reputation, or experience. Do they make it clear so you can follow up on that, or do they hide it? If they're clear and open about who they are, that's a good possibility that you have something trustworthy. If they keep it hidden or they don't cite anything, chances are they stole that information and it's made up or inaccurate or just any of the insanity that is on the internet out there. Does the sources of information themselves cite their own sources? This will help you verify things. It's not the be-all, end-all. Plenty of bad sources claim to then refer to any number of other news reports, research, or sources, but it's a good step in the right direction. Is your information dated and is it up to date? It's not that, new developments prove things wrong. It's just that things change. We get a better understanding. We start to explain what might be unclear initially. Is your source of information emotional or is it passionate? Again, are they trying to use invective or are they aware of the gravity of a situation? That's your call, and especially what you can comment on later on. Can you determine the presence of bias in your source? If you think there's no bias there, is that really the case? Lastly, this is an important one that I can't illustrate by making bigger or smaller on the slide, but is your source inert or reactive? You are not merely gathering information, summarizing, and putting it in a list of it. That's a research report, not a research paper. If you put in some information from your research and then you have nothing to say about it, or you think it says everything that needs to be said, why don't I go read that source? Why am I coming to you? You can avoid this then if you add one more checklist, one more filter for those sources to say, okay, well, this information causes me to have some kind of reaction. I think about this. I'm speculating about this. It leads me to raise further questions or make predictions. Now, you will not merely be reporting information from your sources. That's only half of the work, and really, so far as the writing is concerned, not even half of the grade, probably like 40% of the actual writing. You'll have to come up with commentary, which is making comments on that information and using it to some end. Think of a sports game, a fight, or whatever. The type of, what kind of people do they have doing commentary on the broadcasts? Usually there's, sports nerds who can tell you who was the champion for the past 30, 40 years, or the first one, inane, weird trivia about the topic. And then there's also former players who can tell you what it's like to be out on the field. Oftentimes there's some intersection between those two. And of course, the better ones to watch are the ones who can compose and express themselves more effectively. But these two people bring different types of insight beyond what's just happening, and they're not just telling you what's going on. So consequently, you have to offer commentary. You have to give your insight based on your research. You've strive to be an expert. You strive to gain some new understanding or awareness of your topic, and so your commentary should reflect that. Now, if you need help figuring out what that might be, well, of course, you can speculate as to the motivations of the author or researcher. Why are they doing it? Who paid them, or where's the money coming from, and can they speak frankly, or do they have to couch their words? You can examine the experience and the expertise of the author. You won't be doing this every single time you bring up someone, but if it's especially noteworthy, it's worth throwing in. You can criticize, defend, examine the methods of the research, and ultimately you can then state if you agree or disagree with their conclusions. You should also then consider and speak to if the bias is identifiable and qualified, or is it hidden and suspicious? Do they verify everything, and what does this say on it? Are they being emotional or clear-headed? Now, some shortcuts you might take is to really deal with this consideration. This is like the silver bullet for a research paper. Why do the experts in the field disagree? That does require you to kind of hear what they have to say and present it in a reasonable fashion, and then speak on, what is the deeper issue or conflict. But then you have the option of either picking a side or not picking a side, and you're still showing some really keen awareness. You might also then think of exceptions or qualifications which limit the research or information you're pulling from it. You could make predictions or inferences based on what you now know, give your reactions or feelings to the information, why it's useful to know, and also, most importantly, what patterns you recognize from the research. You have a few options for putting together the research paper. You could do a compare and contrast approach to the information from your sources. That is, work through each of them, or focus on the similarities or differences. If none such things exist, you could look at it from a subject, point, idea, topic, so like the individual components of your topic, what makes it up, what categories, chapters, what parts of it, what ideas are at play or at work, or even the different perspectives you're tackling your research paper from. You can also work on it in a chronological kind of documentary style format, look at things in the past, look at them now, speculate how they might be in the future. Similarly, you could, open with talking about how things now, and then use your research to say, well, let's look into the past to see, how things were, and then move into your talk of what you're speculating for the future. You might also, take a spatial approach to organizing this paper. Say how the issue affects you personally, your community, your region, the nation, the world, or vice versa. You can also then look at the various different places these would reply or would infer or speak to. There's multiple nations, there's multiple regions. There's not just your family. So this here at the end is just a sample outline to break it down. The key with any kind of outline or worksheet you might use is, don't just stop, at one of each of the things. You have as many pieces of evidence as you need. You can have as many subtopics as you want to, and you can comment and say everything you have to say about it. This might just help you get your ideas planned out.